The bronze plaques caught the morning light streaming through my corner office window. Employee of the Year 2019. Employee of the Year 2020. Employee of the Year 2021. Employee of the Year 2022. Employee of the Year 2023. 5 years in a row, each one mounted with precision on the mahogany wall behind my executive desk. But it was the sixth space, still empty, that made me smile as I adjusted my tailored blazer and checked my Cartier watch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The same watch my former supervisor had mockingly pointed to 3 years ago, telling me I'd never amount to anything because I couldn't even show up on time to flip burgers. My name is Isabella Chen, and 3 years ago, everyone in my life believed I was destined for failure. My parents had given up hope after I'd been fired from 7 jobs in 2 years. Fast food, retail, data entry, receptionist work, nothing seemed to stick. The final straw came at Morrison's diner, where I lasted exactly 11 days before Manager Rick Kellerman called me into his cramped office that smelled of grease and disappointment. "You're always late, Isabella, always making excuses, always finding ways to avoid actual work," he had sneered, his coffee-stained tie hanging loose around his thick neck. "I've seen lazy before, but you take it to a whole new level. Some people just aren't cut out for the working world. Maybe you should consider that." The words stung because part of me wondered if he was right. I sat there in that vinyl chair, staring at motivational posters about teamwork while Rick listed my supposed shortcomings. Late 3 times in 11 days, though I'd explained my mother's medical appointments. Slow at taking orders, though I'd been careful to get everything right instead of rushing and making mistakes like my coworkers. Unfriendly with customers, though I'd simply been focused on doing my job well rather than engaging in small talk. "You're fired, Isabella, and honestly, I'm doing you a favor. Maybe now you'll realize that some people just aren't meant to work. Maybe you'll stop wasting everyone's time, including your own." I cleaned out my locker in silence while my coworkers pretended not to notice. Jennifer from the morning shift actually looked relieved. Marcus, who trained me, shook his head like I'd personally disappointed him. Even Sandra from night shift, who I'd barely spoken to, seemed to take satisfaction in watching me pack my few belongings into a plastic bag. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I'd have to tell my parents I'd failed again. I'd have to update my resume and start the humiliating process of job hunting while explaining why I'd been let go. I'd have to face the reality that maybe Rick was right. Maybe I really was too lazy to hold down a job. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table while my mother, Elena, rubbed her temples. The medical bills from her ongoing treatments were piling up, and my father's construction work barely covered the basics. They'd been counting on my income, small as it was, to help with groceries and utilities. "Isabella, honey," your father said gently, setting down his beer and looking at me with tired eyes. "We need to have a serious conversation about your future. This pattern can't continue." "I know, Dad. I know I keep messing up, but I'm trying." "Are you, though?" My mother's voice was sharper than usual. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you're just going through the motions, finding reasons to fail so you don't have to really try." That hurt worse than anything Rick had said. My own parents questioning my work ethic, my character, my basic ability to function as an adult. I excused myself and went to my room, closing the door on their worried whispers about what to do with their 24-year-old daughter who couldn't seem to hold down the simplest jobs. I spent that night scrolling through job postings, each one feeling more impossible than the last. Customer service representative. They'd want someone who could deal with difficult people. Administrative assistant. They'd need someone organized and reliable. Sales associate. They'd require someone outgoing and motivated. I felt like none of those descriptors applied to me. But as I lay there in the dark, something shifted. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was just exhaustion from feeling like a failure. But I started to really examine what had gone wrong at each job. At the grocery store, I'd been written up for spending too much time helping elderly customers find items. Apparently, efficiency mattered more than service. At the retail chain, I'd been criticized for not pushing credit card applications aggressively enough. At the call center, I'd been dinged for having too few calls per hour because I actually listened to customers instead of rushing them off the phone. A pattern emerged that I'd never noticed before. I wasn't lazy, I was thorough. I wasn't slow, I was careful. I wasn't unfriendly, I was professional. The problem wasn't my work ethic. The problem was that I'd been working in environments that valued speed over quality, quantity over care, aggression over service. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. Instead of immediately applying for similar entry-level positions, I researched companies. I read about their values, their culture, their approach to customer service and employee development. I looked for organizations that seemed to align with how I naturally worked, rather than forcing myself to fit into their mold. That's when I found Pinnacle Solutions, a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in process improvement for healthcare organizations. Their website talked about attention to detail, thorough analysis, and building long-term client relationships. They had an opening for a junior analyst position, entry-level, but in a field that seemed to value the very qualities I'd been criticized for elsewhere. The application process was different too. Instead of a 15-minute interview focused on availability and attitude, they gave me a case study to complete at home. They wanted to see how I approached problems, how I analyzed data, how I presented solutions. For the first time in years, I felt excited about a job opportunity. I spent 3 days on that case study. I researched industry benchmarks, created detailed spreadsheets, and prepared a presentation that covered not just what I'd found, but why it mattered and what I recommended. When I submitted it, I felt proud of my work in a way I hadn't since college. The interview with Dr. Sarah Martinez, the head of the analytics department. She was nothing like the managers who dismissed me before. She asked thoughtful questions about my analysis, challenged my assumptions, and seemed genuinely interested in how I'd approached the problem. "Isabella," she said as we wrapped up, "I have to ask about your employment history. You've had several short-term positions. What happened there?" I took a breath and decided to be honest. I think I was working in the wrong environments. I'm someone who values doing things right over doing things fast. I care more about helping people than hitting arbitrary metrics. I've been told that makes me lazy or slow, but I think it just makes me different. Different how? I learn names of regular customers because relationships matter. I double-check my work because accuracy matters. I ask questions when I don't understand something because getting it right the first time is more efficient than fixing mistakes later. If that's lazy, then I guess I'm lazy. But I don't think it is. Sarah smiled for the first time during the interview. "You know what, Isabella? I don't think it is either."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"We'll be in touch." 3 days later, she called with an offer. The salary was modest, but it was more than I'd ever made, and it came with benefits, professional development opportunities, and the chance to work on projects that actually mattered. I accepted immediately. That was exactly 3 years ago today. And as I sat in my corner office, looking at those 5 Employee of the Year awards, I couldn't help but think about Rick Kellerman and his greasy tie, about the coworkers who'd watched me fail with satisfaction, about the parents who'd questioned whether I was cut out for the working world at all. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Those first few months at Pinnacle Solutions were like learning to breathe again after years of holding my breath. Dr. Sarah Martinez became more than a supervisor. She became a mentor who saw potential where others had seen problems. The work was challenging in ways I'd never experienced. Instead of racing against arbitrary timers or pushing products people didn't need, I was solving genuine puzzles that helped healthcare organizations serve patients better. My first major project involved analyzing patient flow inefficiencies at St. Catherine's Medical Center. The hospital was struggling with long wait times and frustrated families, but nobody could pinpoint exactly where the bottlenecks occurred. Previous consultants had rushed through surface-level assessments, but Sarah gave me 6 weeks to dig deep. I spent days observing, interviewing staff, and mapping every step of the patient journey from admission to discharge. What I discovered was fascinating. The delays weren't caused by lazy staff or inadequate resources, as previous reports had suggested. Instead, they stemmed from a series of small communication gaps between departments. Radiology didn't know when to expect patients because scheduling software didn't sync properly with the main system. Lab results sat waiting because nurses were too busy with direct patient care to constantly check for updates. Discharge planning started too late because social workers weren't notified early enough about complex cases. I created a comprehensive report with 18 specific recommendations, complete with cost-benefit analyses and implementation timelines. When we presented it to St. Catherine's leadership team, their faces lit up with recognition. Finally, someone had taken the time to understand their real problems instead of offering generic solutions. 6 months later, St. Catherine's reported a 37% reduction in average wait times and a significant improvement in patient satisfaction scores. The hospital's CEO, Dr. Patricia Vance, personally called Sarah to express her gratitude. That project earned me my first internal recognition at Pinnacle, but more importantly, it confirmed what I'd suspected all along. My careful, thorough approach wasn't a weakness. It was exactly what complex problems required. Word spread quickly in the healthcare consulting world. Other hospitals began specifically requesting the analyst who had transformed St. Catherine's operations. My project load increased steadily, and with it came increasing recognition. Client feedback consistently praised my attention to detail, my ability to see patterns others missed, and my genuine care for improving patient outcomes rather than just hitting efficiency metrics. By the end of my first year, I'd led successful projects at 7 different healthcare facilities. My client retention rate was perfect. Every organization that worked with me hired Pinnacle for additional projects. Sarah promoted me to senior analyst and assigned me to train newer team members. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd been called too lazy to flip burgers was now teaching others how to excel in complex analytical work. The real turning point came during my second year, when Meridian Health System, one of the largest hospital networks in the region, faced a crisis. Their patient safety scores had plummeted following a series of medication errors and communication failures. The board was considering replacing their entire executive team. Previous consulting firms had failed to identify sustainable solutions, and staff morale was at an all-time low. Sarah assigned me as the lead consultant, a role typically reserved for partners with decades of experience. The project was make or break for both Meridian and my career. I assembled a team of 4 analysts and dove into the most comprehensive assessment of my career. We spent 3 months embedded within Meridian's facilities, working different shifts, interviewing hundreds of employees, and analyzing years of incident reports. What we uncovered was a systemic culture problem disguised as operational inefficiencies. Meridian had grown rapidly through acquisitions, absorbing smaller hospitals without properly integrating their different protocols and cultures. Staff felt disconnected from leadership, unsure about procedures, and afraid to report concerns for fear of blame. The medication errors weren't random mistakes. They were predictable outcomes of a fragmented system where nobody felt empowered to speak up. My final presentation to Meridian's board lasted 2 hours. I walked them through our findings with military precision, showing how each safety issue connected to larger cultural and communication problems. Then I presented a comprehensive transformation plan that addressed not just procedures and protocols, but leadership development, staff engagement, and cultural integration. The boardroom was silent when I finished. Board Chair Margaret Chen leaned forward and asked the question I'd been preparing for. How do we know this will work when previous consultants have failed? Because those consultants treated symptoms instead of causes, I replied. They saw medication errors and prescribed better checklists. They saw communication failures and mandated more meetings, but they never asked why dedicated healthcare professionals were making these mistakes in the first place. People don't come to work wanting to harm patients. When errors happen systematically, it's because the system is broken, not the people. The implementation took 18 months and required buy-in from every level of the organization. I worked directly with Meridian's leadership team, conducting monthly progress reviews and adjusting our approach based on real-time feedback. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Patient safety scores improved by 62%. Staff satisfaction surveys showed the highest ratings in company history. Employee turnover dropped to industry-leading lows. Most remarkably, Meridian's transformation became a case study that other health systems wanted to replicate. Pinnacle received inquiries from hospital networks across the country seeking the consultant who had engineered Meridian's turnaround. My professional reputation was established, and my personal confidence was transformed. By my third year, I was leading Pinnacle's largest client accounts and mentoring a team of 12 analysts. Sarah promoted me to principal consultant, making me the youngest person in company history to reach that level. The salary increase was substantial, but more meaningful was the respect from colleagues who now sought my input on their most challenging cases. The Employee of the Year award that first year felt surreal. Standing on stage at Pinnacle's annual conference, accepting recognition for excellence in client service and innovative problem solving, I thought about Rick Kellerman and his certainty that I'd never amount to anything. The second award felt more natural. By the third, fourth, and fifth awards, winning had become almost expected. But success brought unexpected challenges. My parents, who had once worried about my ability to hold any job, now bragged to neighbors about their daughter, the consultant. Friends who had distanced themselves during my struggles suddenly wanted to reconnect. Former coworkers from those failed jobs reached out on social media, some apologizing for their earlier judgments, others asking for career advice or job references. The most surprising contact came through LinkedIn on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. A message from someone named Jennifer Walsh, who I eventually realized was the Jennifer from Morrison's Diner, the same Jennifer who had looked relieved when I was fired 3 years earlier. Isabella, I hope you remember me from Morrison's. I saw your profile and wanted to reach out. I've been following your career success, and I have to admit I'm impressed. Rick always said you'd never make it in the real world, but clearly he was wrong. I'm actually looking for a new opportunity myself. The restaurant industry isn't what it used to be. I was wondering if your company might have any openings for someone with customer service experience. I'd love to catch up, and maybe you could put in a good word for me. I stared at that message for a long time. Jennifer, who had watched me pack my belongings in silence. Jennifer, who had seemed satisfied by my failure. Jennifer, who now wanted my help climbing the same ladder she'd once been certain I could never reach. That evening, I drafted several different responses. Some were professional but cool. Others were more direct about my memories of how she'd treated me. In the end, I chose a different path entirely. I suggested we meet for coffee to discuss her career interests. Not because I'd forgotten how she'd acted, but because I'd learned something important about success that Rick Kellerman and his ilk would never understand. True success isn't about proving doubters wrong, it's about becoming the kind of person who lifts others up instead of tearing them down. The person I'd become through my journey at Pinnacle wouldn't find satisfaction in denying Jennifer an opportunity. Instead, I'd find purpose in showing her what real leadership looked like. But first, there was something I needed to do, something I'd been planning for months, waiting for exactly the right moment. And with my 6th Employee of the Year award ceremony just weeks away, that moment was finally approaching. The coffee shop I chose for my meeting with Jennifer was deliberately ordinary, a chain restaurant with basic tables and predictable service, not the upscale cafe near my office where I usually conducted business. I wanted this conversation to happen on neutral ground, away from the polished world I now inhabited. Jennifer arrived 10 minutes late, looking nervous in a faded blazer that had seen better days. She'd aged more than 3 years would suggest, with stress lines around her eyes and an uncertainty in her posture that I remembered from my own desperate job hunting days. When she spotted me, her smile was overly bright, the kind people wear when they need something. Isabella, wow, you look amazing, really successful. I can't believe how much you've accomplished since Morrison's. She settled into her chair with exaggerated enthusiasm. I always knew you had potential, even back then. The rewriting of history was instant and shameless. I always knew you had potential. The same woman who had watched me clear out my locker with visible relief now claimed she'd seen something special in me all along. I sipped my coffee and let her continue. I've been thinking a lot about my career lately. The restaurant business is tough, you know. Customers are demanding, management is always changing policies, and the hours are brutal. I've been wondering if I have what it takes for something more professional, like what you do. What exactly do you think I do, Jennifer? She paused, clearly unprepared for the question. Well, you're a consultant, right? You help companies solve problems. It seems like interesting work, much better than food service. More stable, better pay, more respect. I nodded slowly. It is all of those things, but it's also demanding in ways you might not expect. Long hours analyzing data, writing detailed reports, presenting to executives who ask tough questions. Sometimes I work weekends for weeks straight when a client has an urgent deadline. It requires a completely different skill set than restaurant work. But you learned those skills, right? I mean, you didn't go to business school or anything. If you could figure it out, I'm sure I could too. There it was. The assumption that my success had been simple, almost accidental. That consulting was just a better version of taking orders, requiring no particular talent or preparation. Jennifer saw my transformation, but completely missed the years of careful study, deliberate practice, and relentless self-improvement that had made it possible. Tell me about your experience with data analysis, Jennifer. Have you worked with spreadsheets, statistical software, or research methodologies? Her confidence wavered. Well, not exactly, but I'm good with computers and I pick things up quickly. At Morrison's, I learned the POS system faster than anyone else. Point of sale systems and enterprise data analysis aren't quite the same thing. What about writing? Have you created business reports or presentations? I write well. I mean, I got good grades in English class, and I'm great with people, which is important for consulting, right? I finished my coffee while Jennifer continued explaining why her personality would overcome any technical gaps. Her reasoning was familiar because I'd once thought the same way. Before Pinnacle, I'd assumed that intelligence and good intentions were enough, that specific skills were just details that could be picked up along the way. Experience had taught me otherwise. Jennifer, can I be direct with you? Of course, I appreciate honesty. 3 years ago, when Rick fired me from Morrison's, you seemed relieved. You didn't say goodbye when I cleaned out my locker. You didn't offer support or encouragement. You watched me leave like I was a problem being solved. Her face flushed. Isabella, I don't remember it that way. If I seemed distant, it was probably because I was dealing with my own stress. Working at Morrison's was hard for everyone. Another rewrite, another convenient memory adjustment. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't going to pretend either. Jennifer represented something larger than personal slights. She embodied the mindset that had held me back for years, the belief that circumstances rather than choices determined outcomes. The truth is, Jennifer, I could probably help you get an interview at Pinnacle. We do hire people from non-traditional backgrounds sometimes. But before I make that introduction, I need you to understand something important. She leaned forward eagerly. Success isn't about finding the right opportunity or knowing the right people. It's about becoming the kind of person who can handle opportunities when they arise. When I started at Pinnacle, I spent every evening for 6 months learning Excel functions and statistical analysis. I read industry journals during lunch breaks. I volunteered for weekend training sessions that no one else wanted to attend. But you're naturally smart, Jennifer interrupted. It probably came easier to you. Actually, it didn't. I failed my first certification exam twice. My early presentations were terrible. I made mistakes that kept me awake at night. The difference was that I treated every failure as information rather than confirmation that I didn't belong. Jennifer's enthusiasm was dimming as she realized this conversation wasn't going where she'd expected. If you're serious about changing careers, I'd be happy to recommend some resources. There are online courses in data analysis, technical writing programs, industry certifications you can pursue. But you need to do the work first. Show me that you're committed to developing real skills, not just escaping food service. How long would that take? Probably a year of consistent effort to develop basic competencies, 2 years to become truly competitive, maybe longer depending on how quickly you learn. Jennifer's face fell. That seems like a long time. It is. But it's the same time I invested, just in a different order. I spent years failing at jobs I wasn't prepared for before I found work that matched my natural abilities and learned the skills to excel at it. She gathered her purse, clearly disappointed that our meeting hadn't produced the quick solution she'd hoped for. Well, I appreciate you meeting with me. Maybe I'll look into those courses you mentioned. I hope you do. And Jennifer, I want you to know that I don't hold any grudges about Morrison's. We were all doing the best we could with what we knew then. After she left, I sat alone for a few more minutes, thinking about the conversation. Jennifer's approach to career change was identical to my old approach to finding jobs, looking for shortcuts, believing that wanting something was enough, focusing on what seemed unfair rather than what could be changed. The irony was that helping Jennifer had clarified something important about my own journey. I hadn't succeeded despite being called lazy. I'd succeeded because being misunderstood had forced me to develop self-awareness that others took for granted. Every failed job had taught me something about my strengths and weaknesses. Every dismissive comment had motivated me to prove my capabilities to myself, not to them. That afternoon, I returned to Pinnacle for a leadership team meeting where we discussed the upcoming Employee of the Year ceremony. This year's event would be different because the company was celebrating its 15th anniversary. They'd invited former employees, major clients, and industry leaders for an expanded celebration. Sarah mentioned that she'd received RSVPs from some unexpected guests. Apparently, word about our success had spread throughout the local business community. Several restaurant managers had reached out, curious about our hiring practices and company culture. One name on the list made me pause: Rick Kellerman from Morrison's Diner. Sarah noticed my reaction. "Do you know him?" "We have history. He was my supervisor at a job I had before Pinnacle." "Good history or bad history?" "Definitely bad. He fired me and told me I was too lazy to ever succeed in the working world." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Well, I guess he'll get to see how wrong he was. Are you okay with him being there?" "Actually, I think it's perfect timing." The ceremony was held at the downtown convention center, a venue I'd driven past countless times during my job hunting days, when such events seemed impossibly out of reach. Arriving as an honored guest in my own car, wearing a dress that cost more than I used to make in a month, felt like stepping into someone else's life. Rick appeared during the cocktail hour, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit. He'd gained weight and lost hair, but his expression of perpetual irritation remained unchanged. He was studying the display of award plaques when I approached him. "Hello, Rick." He turned, confused for a moment before recognition dawned. "Isabella, I heard you work here now. Congratulations." "Thank you. I see you found the Employee of the Year display. Those are all mine from the past 5 years." His eyes widened as he processed the information. 5 years in a row? At the same company? "That's right. It turns out I'm not too lazy to hold a job after all." Rick shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Isabella, I hope there are no hard feelings about Morrison's. Sometimes personalities just don't fit, you know? It wasn't personal." "You're right. It wasn't personal. It was a fundamental misunderstanding about what constitutes good work. You valued speed over accuracy, compliance over critical thinking, and conformity over innovation. I valued thoroughness, problem-solving, and genuine service. Neither approach was wrong, but they were incompatible." He nodded uncertainly, clearly expecting anger rather than analysis. "The lesson I learned wasn't that you were a bad manager, Rick. It's that success isn't about changing yourself to fit other people's expectations. It's about finding environments where your natural strengths are valued and then developing the skills to maximize those strengths." The ceremony began before Rick could respond, but I caught him watching from the back of the room as I accepted my 6th consecutive Employee of the Year award. The recognition felt different this time, not like validation I'd been seeking, but like a natural outcome of work I genuinely loved. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of finding work that aligns with your values and capabilities. I mentioned that some of us take longer to find our place, but that doesn't make us lazy or unmotivated. Sometimes it just means we're looking for something that doesn't exist yet, something we'll have to create for ourselves. After the ceremony, I found Rick near the exit. He approached hesitantly. "Isabella, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you, and I'm sorry." "I appreciate that, Rick, but you don't owe me anything. Your opinion of me was based on limited information in a specific context. You saw someone struggling to fit into a role that wasn't right for them, and you made a reasonable conclusion based on what you observed. But I should have been more supportive instead of dismissive." "Maybe. But if you had been, I might have stayed at Morrison's longer, trying to force something that was never going to work. Being fired forced me to confront some hard truths about myself and ultimately led me to where I belong." I handed him my business card. "If you ever have employees who seem unmotivated or unfocused, consider that they might just be in the wrong role.
Sometimes the people who struggle most in one environment are the ones who excel most dramatically in another. Driving home that night, I thought about the journey from that humiliating day at Morrison's to this evening's celebration. The transformation hadn't been about proving anyone wrong or getting revenge on people who doubted me. It had been about learning to see my perceived weaknesses as potential strengths in the right context. Tomorrow, I'd return to my office with its wall of awards and continue the work I loved. But more importantly, I'd continue being the kind of leader who recognized potential in unexpected places, who valued substance over speed, and who understood that sometimes the best employees are the ones who don't fit neatly into conventional expectations. They'd claimed I was too lazy to hold a job. Now my office was lined with awards for excellence. But the real victory wasn't in the recognition. It was in discovering that success comes not from changing who you are, but from finding where you belong and then becoming the best version of yourself in that space. 6 months after the anniversary ceremony, I received an unexpected call that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my professional trajectory. Dr. Amanda Foster, the CEO of Nationwide Healthcare Consortium, was on the line with a proposition that seemed almost too ambitious to be real. Isabella, I've been following your work with healthcare organizations for the past 3 years. Your transformation of Meridian Health System has become legendary in our industry. I'm calling because we're facing a challenge that requires exactly your expertise, but on a scale you've never encountered before. Nationwide Healthcare represented over 200 hospitals across 38 states. Their patient satisfaction scores had been declining steadily, staff turnover was reaching crisis levels, and several facilities were at risk of losing their accreditation. Previous consulting firms had proposed piecemeal solutions, but nothing had created lasting change. What we need isn't just another efficiency study or protocol revision. We need someone who understands that healthcare transformation is fundamentally about culture change, someone who can see the human elements that others miss.
After watching what you accomplished at Meridian, our board believes you're that person. The scope was staggering. A 2-year engagement that would require building a team of 20 consultants, traveling to facilities nationwide, and developing implementation strategies for the largest healthcare network in the country. The financial terms she outlined were beyond anything I'd ever imagined. But more compelling than the money was the opportunity to impact patient care on a scale that could influence industry standards nationwide. There was one condition that made the offer even more intriguing. Nationwide wanted to hire Pinnacle as the primary contractor, but they wanted me to lead the engagement as an independent consultant with my own team. Essentially, they were offering me the chance to launch my own consulting practice with the largest healthcare project in the country as my foundation client. The decision required careful consideration. Leaving Pinnacle meant walking away from the security and prestige I'd worked so hard to build. It meant taking responsibility for outcomes that could affect thousands of healthcare workers and millions of patients. It meant proving that my success hadn't been dependent on Pinnacle's infrastructure and reputation. Sarah was surprisingly supportive when I discussed the opportunity with her. Isabella, you've outgrown what we can offer you here. This project is exactly the kind of challenge you're meant to tackle. Pinnacle will always be your professional home, but it's time for you to build something of your own. The transition took 3 months to orchestrate properly. I established Chen Healthcare Solutions in a renovated office building downtown, recruited a core team of analysts from various firms, and developed the methodological framework that would guide our approach to Nationwide's transformation. My first hire was Marcus Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who had been working in hospital administration for 15 years before transitioning to consulting. He brought operational expertise that complemented my analytical strengths. Next came Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, a former emergency room physician who understood healthcare culture from the inside. Then Jennifer Kim, a data scientist who could handle the complex statistical modeling that large-scale analysis required. The irony of building a team wasn't lost on me. 3 years earlier, I'd struggled to work effectively with colleagues who saw me as slow and unmotivated. Now I was selecting people based on their ability to think deeply, question assumptions, and prioritize quality over speed. The team I assembled shared my belief that sustainable change required understanding root causes rather than treating surface symptoms. Our first site visit was to Riverside Medical Center in Ohio, one of Nationwide's most troubled facilities. Staff morale surveys ranked it in the bottom 5% of all hospitals nationwide. Patient complaints were increasing monthly, and turnover in nursing staff exceeded 60% annually. The previous consulting team had recommended standard solutions: more training, better communication protocols, and revised performance metrics. Within a week of observation, we identified the real problem. Riverside had grown rapidly through mergers with smaller community hospitals, but the integration had been purely financial. Each facility maintained its own procedures, documentation systems, and cultural norms. Nurses transferred between units found themselves working with unfamiliar equipment, following different protocols, and reporting to managers who had conflicting expectations. The stress wasn't caused by inadequate training or poor communication. It was caused by a fundamental lack of operational coherence. Healthcare workers were being asked to provide consistent patient care within an inconsistent system. The resulting frustration manifested as burnout, turnover, and declining quality measures. Our solution involved more than standardizing procedures. We developed a comprehensive integration program that addressed everything from equipment procurement to cultural values alignment. Instead of imposing uniform policies from above, we worked with staff at each facility to identify best practices that could be scaled across the network. The transformation took 8 months, longer than Riverside's leadership had hoped, but faster than anyone thought possible for such comprehensive change. Patient satisfaction scores improved by 43%. Staff turnover dropped to industry average levels. Most significantly, Riverside became a model that other nationwide facilities actively sought to emulate. Word of our success spread quickly throughout the healthcare industry. Organizations that had never considered consulting began reaching out for assessments. Medical schools invited me to speak about healthcare leadership. Industry publications featured articles about our methodologies and outcomes. The recognition was gratifying, but it also brought unexpected challenges. Success at this level attracted attention from competitors who questioned my qualifications and experience. Some established consulting firms suggested that my rapid rise was more about luck than skill. Others implied that healthcare organizations were simply desperate enough to try unproven approaches. The criticism might have bothered me years earlier, but my experience at Morrison's had taught me something valuable about external validation. Other people's opinions about my capabilities were far less important than my actual results. The healthcare organizations we'd transformed could speak for themselves about the value of our work. More personally meaningful was a letter I received from Maria Santos, a nurse at Riverside Medical Center. She wrote about how the changes we'd implemented had restored her faith in healthcare as a profession. After 15 years of increasing frustration with bureaucracy and inefficiency, she'd been considering leaving nursing entirely. Our transformation had reminded her why she'd chosen healthcare initially and given her hope that positive change was possible. Letters like Maria's arrived regularly from healthcare workers across the country. Each one reinforced my understanding that consulting wasn't really about improving abstract organizational metrics. It was about creating conditions where dedicated professionals could do their best work serving people who needed their help. By the end of the second year, Chen Healthcare Solutions had completed transformations at 47 nationwide facilities and had been hired by 6 other healthcare networks for similar projects. Our team had grown to 35 consultants, and we'd opened satellite offices in Chicago, Atlanta, and Seattle. The business success exceeded every projection, but the personal satisfaction came from a different source entirely. I'd created an organization that valued the same qualities I'd been criticized for at Morrison's: thoroughness over speed, analysis over assumptions, long-term relationships over short-term profits. The company culture reflected my belief that sustainable success required understanding rather than rushing. One afternoon, while reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office, I received a LinkedIn message that made me smile. It was from a young woman named Ashley Martinez, who had just been fired from her 3rd job in 18 months. She'd found my story through online research and wanted advice about dealing with repeated employment failures. Her message was painfully familiar. She described being labeled as unfocused and unmotivated by supervisors who valued quick execution over careful consideration. She'd begun to believe that maybe she really wasn't cut out for professional work. The desperation in her words reminded me of my own lowest moments after leaving Morrison's.
I invited Ashley to visit our offices for an informational interview, not because we had immediate openings, but because I remembered how isolating it felt to question your own capabilities while everyone around you seemed confident about your limitations. Ashley arrived nervous and overprepared, carrying a portfolio of work samples and a list of thoughtful questions about our industry. During our conversation, she demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking that our projects required. Her supposed weakness for overthinking was actually a strength for complex problem solving. Her tendency to ask difficult questions showed intellectual curiosity rather than obstinacy. I offered her an entry-level position with our team, but more importantly, I offered her something I'd needed years earlier. Someone who recognized that struggling in the wrong environment doesn't predict failure in the right one. Ashley's relief was visible when I explained that our work required precisely the qualities she'd been criticized for elsewhere. Training Ashley reminded me how much I'd learned since my own early struggles. Success hadn't just been about finding the right job or developing technical skills. It had been about learning to trust my own judgment about my capabilities instead of accepting other people's assessments as definitive truth. That evening, I updated the wall display in my office. Alongside the 5 Employee of the Year awards from Pinnacle, I'd added recognition from various healthcare organizations, industry leadership awards, and letters of appreciation from transformed facilities. But the addition I was most proud of was a simple framed photo from Ashley's first successful client presentation, capturing the confidence of someone who had discovered where she belonged. The journey from Morrison's Diner to Chen Healthcare Solutions had taught me that laziness and thoroughness often looked identical to people who valued speed over accuracy. The difference wasn't in the behavior itself, but in finding environments where careful work was appreciated rather than criticized. Rick Kellerman had been wrong about my potential, but he hadn't been wrong about what he observed. I really had been slow at taking orders, unfocused on efficiency metrics, and resistant to rushing through tasks without understanding their purpose. Those characteristics made me unsuitable for food service work, but they made me exceptionally qualified for analytical consulting. The people who had labeled me as lazy hadn't been malicious. They'd been working with limited information in specific contexts. Their assessments reflected their priorities and experiences rather than objective truth about my capabilities. Understanding that distinction had freed me from needing their approval and allowed me to focus on finding where I actually belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.